Imagine a country where a third of its land lies below sea level. A country where the largest airport, welcoming tens of millions of passengers a year, sits on the bottom of a former lake, 4 meters below the ocean surface, and whose lowest point drops nearly 7 meters below the waves. By all laws of nature, this land should be a seabed. If you turned off all the pumps today, it would become one within days as the water rushed back. Yet, against all odds, nearly 18 million people live and thrive on this impossible territory. Cities stand tall, fields flourish, and the nation ranks among the wealthiest on the planet. This is the Netherlands, a country that has been at war with the sea for 1,000 years and, remarkably, is winning. In Europe, there is an old saying, "God created the world, but the Dutch created the Netherlands." And that is only half a joke. Netherlands literally translates to lowlands. It is a giant delta where several major European rivers, including the Rhine, empty into the North Sea. For millennia, these rivers deposited silt and sand, while thick layers of peat built up across the waterlogged plains. The result was a flat, wet, spongy environment barely rising out of the water, a realm of swamps, tidal channels, and constant flooding. When the ancient Romans reached these shores, they wrote about the local inhabitants with a mix of astonishment and pity, describing them as a miserable people living on wretched mounds surrounded by water, collecting firewood from whatever debris the tide washed in. Those very mounds, man-made residential hills called terps, were the first stroke of genius by the locals. Lacking the power to stop the floods, people simply lifted their homes and villages above the water, building the hills by hand, basket by basket. Hundreds of these ancient terps survive to this day, many still topped by historic churches and farms. This is how a 2,000-year-old wrestling match with the sea began. The birth of dikes and waterboards. About 1,000 years ago, the Dutch shifted from defense to offense. Instead of hiding on mounds, they began enclosing entire tracts of land with earthen walls, giving birth to the first dikes and dams. Along with these structures came something perhaps even more vital, a unique form of self-governance. Because a dike protects everyone living behind it, a breach caused by one negligent landowner would drown his hard-working neighbors too. Consequently, as early as the Middle Ages, citizens formed water boards, waterschappen. These elected councils maintained the dikes, collected taxes for their upkeep, and held the authority to compel anyone, from a peasant to a noble lord, to do their duty in defending the land from water.
The oldest democracy.
These water boards still exist today and are considered the oldest democratic institutions in the Netherlands, predating the Dutch state itself. The Dijkgraaf. Each board is led by an official holding a title straight out of a medieval novel, the Dijkgraaf, Dijkgraaf, or Dijkwarden. Elections for water boards are held to this day alongside parliamentary ones, meaning the Dutch literally vote for the people who will manage their water and dikes. The Dike Army. For centuries, every citizen was legally required to show up and defend the dikes in times of crisis. This volunteer Dike Army still formally exists. During massive storms, wardens patrol the walls looking for leaks, just as their ancestors did hundreds of years ago. Many historians believe that iconic Dutch traits, such as a knack for consensus, cooperation, and a culture of compromise, were forged by water. In the face of a flood, social class and petty disputes mean nothing. A dike either holds or it doesn't. The sea, inadvertently, co-authored the national character. Windmills and polders. Keeping the sea out was only half the battle. The Dutch also had to get rid of the water accumulating inside. Rainfall, river overflows, and groundwater seepage. This is where the ultimate symbol of the Netherlands comes in, the windmill. While we usually associate windmills with grinding grain, the vast majority in Holland did something else entirely. They pumped water. The wind turned a wheel or an Archimedes screw, lifting water from low-lying areas and pouring it over the dike into drainage canals, which carried it out to sea. This mechanism laid the foundation for the entire country, the polder. A polder is a piece of land reclaimed from water, enclosed by dikes, and kept dry by a system of canals and pumps. It operates under a simple but ruthless rule. You must pump water forever, without weekends or holidays. Stop the pumps, and the land returns to the deep. Starting in the 15th century, the Dutch used polders to drain entire lakes. Rows of windmills were lined up in chains, lifting water step by step from one level to the next until dry land emerged for farming and villages. This was exactly how the massive Haarlemmermeer Lake was drained, the very lakebed where Schiphol Airport stands today. Its name actually means ship hell, a nod to the days when violent storms routinely sank ships there. You can still see this historic water system in action at Kinderdijk, a UNESCO World Heritage Site where a legendary lineup of 19 windmills from the 18th century stands along the canals. Today, modern pumping stations have taken over. Thousands of them, ranging from small automated stations to giants capable of draining entire rivers, work 24/7 across the country. The Netherlands is essentially a giant bathtub that requires non-stop bailing. However, this grand engineering feat has a catch. When peat is drained, it dries out, shrinks, and compacts. As a result, the land sinks lower, meaning the Dutch have to pump even harder. It is a continuous loop. The better they drain the land, the lower it sinks, and the more critical the dikes and pumps become. There is no escaping this loop, only eternal maintenance. The continental axis. Living in a constant relationship with sea level, the Dutch established a baseline centuries ago. The Amsterdam Ordnance-Datum, Normaal Amsterdamspeil, or NAP. This measurement of the average high water mark proved so practical that it was eventually adopted as the reference point for elevation across much of Europe. When a mountain height is measured in Germany or Austria, it is calculated from the water level in Amsterdam. The 1953 tragedy and the Delta Works. For centuries the system held, but the sea delivered a catastrophic reminder of who truly rules the region. On the night of February 1, 1953, a ferocious North Sea storm collided with a high spring tide. Hurricane-force winds pushed a wall of water toward the coast, raising sea levels meters above normal. The old dikes, weakened by World War II and decades of underfunding, collapsed. In the pitch-black, roaring storm, water breached the defenses in dozens of places, catching the sleeping villages of the southwestern provinces completely off guard. People woke up to freezing water rushing into their bedrooms. Families scrambled onto roofs and attics as old brick houses crumbled under the waves. Phone lines were severed, radio stations were off the air, and many communities fought the deluge in total isolation. In the first hours, communication relied almost entirely on amateur ham radio operators. Rescue efforts were improvised using fishing boats, military amphibians, and a handful of helicopters. The disaster claimed over 1,800 lives, killed tens of thousands of livestock, and left hundreds of thousands homeless. It was a national trauma on par with a war. Amid the tragedy emerged a real-life heroic feat. When the water tore a massive hole in a dike shielding the densely populated heart of the country, threatening to flood cities home to millions, a local mayor convinced a skipper to take a desperate gamble. The captain steered his massive grain barge directly into the roaring breach. The vessel got stuck in the gap, plugging the torrent and buying volunteers enough time to reinforce the dike with sandbags. That single skipper and his barge saved the most populated region of the country. Weeks after the disaster, a state commission delivered a historic mandate. This must never happen again, no matter the cost. This sparked Project Delta, the Delta Works, the most ambitious engineering initiative in European history. Over several decades, the Dutch constructed a massive network of dams, sluices, locks, and storm surge barriers across the country's southwestern river mouths. The American Society of Civil Engineers later named it one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. The 2 crown jewels of the project are the Oosterschelde Barrier, a 9-kilometer-long structure made of colossal concrete pillars holding massive steel gates. Originally, the bay was going to be sealed off completely with a solid dam, but fishermen and environmentalists protested because a permanent dam would destroy the unique tidal ecosystem and its famous oyster and mussel beds. The country compromised on a movable barrier that cost multiple times more. Normally, the gates are up, allowing the sea to flow freely and preserve marine life. During a storm surge, the gates drop down, sealing out the sea. It was the first time an engineering project of this scale was redesigned purely for ecological preservation. The Maaslandkering. This barrier protects the port of Rotterdam, the largest port in Europe. Because a fixed dam would block ocean-going megaships, engineers designed an automated system featuring two massive hollow steel gates. As seen in the visual above, these gates are parked safely on the dry riverbanks during normal weather to keep the shipping lane entirely clear. Each gate is roughly the size of the Eiffel Tower laid on its side. When a computer system monitoring the weather predicts a dangerous storm surge, the gates automatically float out into the channel, meet in the middle, fill with water, and sink to the riverbed to form a solid seal. Because closing the barrier halts all shipping traffic and impacts the continental economy, the computer is programmed to deploy it only in extreme scenarios, removing human hesitation from the equation. The Delta Works also introduced a new safety philosophy. The Dutch legally mandated the maximum acceptable probability of a defense failure. For the most populated zones, dikes are engineered to withstand a storm so severe it only occurs once every 10,000 years, a standard unmatched by any other country where defenses are typically built for 100 or 200-year events. Every dike is registered, regularly inspected, and upgraded at the slightest sign of wear. The Dutch answer to the sea is not last-minute heroism, but meticulous, never-ending prevention. Reshaping geography, Flevoland. In the early 20th century, the Dutch decided to permanently neutralize the Zuiderzee, a massive saltwater bay that carved deep into the mainland and routinely flooded central provinces. They built the Afsluitdijk, a 32-kilometer-long enclosing dam that cut the bay off from the North Sea, gradually turning the saltwater gulf into a freshwater lake called IJsselmeer. This triumph had a human cost, paid by the historic fishing villages that had relied on the sea for generations. The former island of Urk, a proud fishing community, found itself landlocked when the surrounding polders were drained. Today, it presents the surreal sight of a traditional fishing port surrounded entirely by agricultural fields, though its fishermen still sail out to the North Sea via specialized locks. On the dry bed of the former bay, the Dutch created an entirely new province, Flevoland, the largest artificial island on Earth. During excavation, archaeologists uncovered the wrecks of hundreds of ships spanning centuries, from medieval fishing boats to Dutch Golden Age traders. Flevoland is effectively the world's largest dry land shipwreck graveyard. Today, farmers still occasionally hit the timber of an old shipwreck with a plow right in the middle of a wheat field. People here literally cycle, live, and grow the country's famous tulips on land that was underwater just a century ago. Debunking the myths. The Boy and the Dike. The famous story of the little boy who plugged the leaking dike with his finger and stayed there all night to save the country is entirely fictional. It was invented by an American author in the 19th century novel Hans Brinker, or The Silver Skates. The Dutch had never heard of it until foreign tourists kept asking where the monument was. Being practical people, they eventually built a few statues across the country to satisfy visitors. Logically, a finger cannot save a leaking dike. Water would erode the soil around it within minutes. Amsterdam floats like Venice. Amsterdam does not float on water, it stands on piles. Millions of wooden, and now concrete stilts, are driven through the soft mud into a solid layer of sand deep underground. The entire historic center, including the Royal Palace, which rests on more than 13,000 piles, is held up by this underground forest. The "half the country is below sea level" claim. Statistically, about 1/3 of the Netherlands sits below sea level. However, without dikes and pumps, regular flooding would submerge nearly 2/3 of the country, the exact areas where the vast majority of the population lives and where the economy is concentrated. Room for the river, a new philosophy. In recent years, the Dutch have shifted their strategy away from total containment, choosing instead to give some land back to the water. Climate change is driving sea levels higher and making river floods more severe. Engineers realize that dikes cannot be raised indefinitely. The higher the wall, the more catastrophic the disaster if it breaks. The new philosophy is, don't fight the water, make room for it. Under the Room for the River program,
dikes were moved inland in dozens of locations, turning former farmland back into natural floodplains. This gives rising rivers a safe space to overflow without threatening cities. Implementing this required the government to buy out multi-generational farms, a painful but necessary trade-off to protect urban areas. Certain polders were intentionally flooded to act as safety reservoirs. In Rotterdam, public squares and parks are designed to double as temporary water basins during heavy downpours.
Architects are building floating neighborhoods where houses are secured to vertical pilings, allowing them to ride out floods by simply sliding up and down like rings on a finger. Instead of constantly dredging and refilling eroded beaches, engineers created the sand motor, a massive, hook-shaped artificial peninsula of sand. Ocean currents naturally distribute this sand along the coast over a decade, reinforcing the beaches naturally without disruptive heavy machinery. Today, this expertise is a prime export. Dutch engineers design flood protections for New Orleans and New York, and consult on water management in Venice, Jakarta, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. The Netherlands operates like a bicycle. It keeps working as long as you keep pedaling. After 1,000 years of practice, they have no intention of stopping.